Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Boston Balling. I'm your host, Gabby Hurlbut. I hope everyone's having a good start to the week. It's been beautiful weather outside where I am, and I hope everyone's been able to get outside and enjoy that. I just hope that it stays and that the warm weather is just here now. So, because we know how bad the winters get. So, everyone just try to get outside, enjoy it, and have a good rest of your week. It's a really, really exciting time in sports right now. The NBA playoffs are starting tonight. Well, the playing games are starting, so it's really fun time, and I hope everybody's doing well. I'm pleased to introduce my special guest for this evening. He does a really, really good job covering the Celtics. He has his own podcast. Adam Taylor, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for doing this. I really enjoy your Celtics coverage and you being so active on Twitter and everything else. So I'm definitely looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah, I try my best. It's good to know that people see what I'm putting out. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. So, as we know, this Celtics season has been a bit of a frustration, to kind of sum it up in my words right now. There's just been a lot of just question marks and holes that I think we've seen throughout the season. And then they went out and made some moves at the trade deadline, and they did start playing better, but there's just been a lot of inconsistency still. And I think that that's frustrated a lot of people, myself included. And so I just kind of wanted to get your perspective on just how you thought that this season went in general as we head into the play-in games and the game tonight, and just how you kind of feel about this season as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I spoke about this to I was talking about this to Keith Smith the other day. Actually, was if you look at the first loss against Detroit very early in the season, we had that back-to-back against Detroit, and we split that back-to-back 1-1. That
Yeah.
was more indicative of how the season was going to be than what any of us kind of expected at that moment. We just thought, oh, they dropped a game, it's okay. We were still riding high off that Jason Tatum bank shot over Giannis in the first game of the season, and everything still seemed great. And you still got that the good vibes from hitting the conference finals a few months earlier, so everything seemed great. But then obviously we start to see flaws appear in the roster. There's a lack of depth towards the end of the bench. The veterans that they brought in didn't really gel. I mean, Tristan Thompson had that I think it was a calf injury to begin the year, and that lingered for quite a long time. And obviously when that's lingering, you're not able to really gel with your team on defense, really buy into the switching that's being asked of you. I mean, if you look at Tristan Thompson and his athleticism, he's not the same athletic player that he was 2-3 years ago. So his biggest attribute is his ability to switch from 5-through-2 and go from defending the post to defending the perimeter in a moment's notice. And that's where that versatility is what added value. So when that calf injury came and that versatility was taken away, we started to really see the weaknesses in that 4 and 5 rotation. The double big lineups didn't work. There was no spacing. And I tweeted this out a few days ago, this season was the worst season in the world to be a top heavy roster. If you look at the teams that really struggled, the Lakers, Boston, Miami struggled a little bit. They're top heavy too. And, they were 3 of the semi-finalists last year. So I do think that the depth issue was a big problem this year. And that kind of expedited the losing, because you lose a few games, morale gets low, then you lose a few more, then you manage to sneak a win or two, and things look good again. But realistically, I think the team are where they deserve to be right now. I think the injuries have played a huge role this year, but that isn't just for Boston. But if you look at every team that was hurt a lot, then you can see like Miami, LA, Boston, those 3 teams really got hammered by COVID this year. And all 3 of them are in a very similar situation. So I'm not out with pitchforks for anybody.
Yeah, this season was definitely, I agree with you on a lot of the points you made. I think injuries were a factor, but depth is something that I've been worried about that we really did see this year. And there were a lot of holes that we saw. And I was very disappointed with Tristan Thompson, because when they brought him in, I was actually excited about that. And I thought he was going to be somebody that was really going to contribute. And granted, I mean, he had his injury. And then when he started getting more playing time and he wasn't really living up to the expectations that a lot of us had, I started to get very disappointed in that because I was like, wow, now this is looking like it wasn't even a good move. And that's just disappointing to me at watching games when I had these expectations for him as somebody that I actually really thought could contribute and just wasn't. And so I think that was definitely part of it. I mean, I love the Brown Tatum combo, and I hope that they are here to stay for a while. I hope that they hang on to them because they're still so young and they still have so much ahead of them that they can do to contribute to this team. I do like what I've seen from Evan Fournier since they brought him in. I think I'm happy that they brought him in at the deadline because I think he's somebody that has really helped them address some of the struggles that they had prior to bringing him in.
Yeah, I mean, he's helped with the penetration a bunch. I think that was the biggest thing that Boston really needed, was they were running so many spread pick and rolls and angle pick and rolls where you have to have your wings at the corner at the slot or the wing, and then you're just trying to spread the floor with these screen and rolls just to be able to create some form of leverage and get guys going downhill. But nobody was penetrating, so people were coming off the screens and then just resetting, and it became so monotonous, so predictable. Since Fournier's been there, they've diversified the offense quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
You see them going a little bit deeper into Brad Stevens' playbook, and because of that, there's now multiple guys that are scoring quite consistently now. Kemba Walker's game has improved because there's somebody else occupying defenders' minds when there's a dribble drive penetration. Jaylen Brown was actually thriving with Fournier out there until that injury. Tatum seems to be slowly working their way like an understanding with Fournier, and I like the fact that those two played the first game of the last two. It wasn't New York. I forget who it was because it was a boring game anyway. Who was it? Who did we play?
Right before the Knicks.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that would have been Saturday's game, right?
It was Minnesota.
Yeah, they played the Timberwolves. That's right.
Yeah.
That was a blowout. That was a boring game anyway.
Yeah, it was super boring, but if you could see that Tatum and Fournier were just trying to figure out their chemistry and how to play off of each other, and that's been a big point for me all year. The difference between a good group of players is they play together, they play on the same team, and they pass when they need to. Great players play off of each other. They manipulate defenses based on another person's movement, and then once that defense bends, that's when they start to really go to work. And I think that Fournier is allowing them to actually start bending defenses before they start actually implementing offensive sets. And because of that, we've started to see better overall consistency on that end of the floor.
I agree with that for sure. I think that there's a lot of improvements we've seen on offense over the last few weeks, really, I'd say. Defensively, I still am concerned, though, because I think that there's been a lot of inconsistency on defense this year, and they're leaving people wide open, and there's just not a lot of aggressiveness going on the defensive side of the ball overall that I would hope to see at this point. And I think that there's a lot of different issues that go into that, but I really do worry about the defense even still now going into the game against the Wizards tonight.
Yeah, it's all about on-ball pressure, right? Like pressuring guys who have the ball, denying the passing lanes, and then not overhelping or helping too soon. The weak side corner has been one of the biggest pet peeves for me all year. I don't know if you've seen that too. They're overhelping off that corner early. And obviously you need to be in a position to tag a roll man, and you need to make sure that you're there before, because if you come late, it's a foul. If you come at the right moment, then you might be able to draw a charge. But ideally you want to be a deterrent. And so I get why guys are sagging off that weak side corner early, but they're being caught out so consistently. And that's where Tatum's regression really, for me, defensively has hurt this team. Because he pressured the passing lanes exceptionally well last year. Every time I think it was 1.4 steals in the passing lane per game he was averaging last year. I might be a bit wrong there. That's from memory. But knowing that he was there and he could pilfer a pass at any moment, I love that word, so I have to use it. If he could pilfer a pass at any moment, really acted as a deterrent. And then Jaylen Brown's regression as an on-ball defender hurt as well. So there was regression all around, but it definitely hurt this year. But I think no practice time kind of it magnified all of those issues because there was just nowhere along the road were they able to get in the lab and really start putting pieces together and figuring out how this was going to work.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit a lot of those points that I was kind of feeling all year too when I was watching them play. And I think that Tatum defensively has definitely been a disappointment this year. And I think that that's impacted a lot of what they do. And you know, they try to change things up and they'll try to be more aggressive on defense and they'll try to put pressure on more players. And then sometimes they'll just stand there and they'll watch, you know, players like AD or somebody just take a wide open three. And I'm like, well, who was there? Like, who's going to cover a player like that you know is likely going to hit that type of shot? And so I actually liked the defense that I saw from the bench against the Knicks on Sunday a lot more than the defense I've seen all season from the starters. And that's saying something because that was the type of defense that was being aggressive and forcing turnovers and actually covering people. And that made a huge difference. And I mean, they came back and almost won that game. And that a lot of that had to do with their defense, especially in that fourth quarter. So if they could play that type of defense all year and carry that over into games like tonight, or if they have to play another play-in game, or if they go to the playoffs and have to play other competitive teams, that's the type of defense that I was hoping to see all year from them. And I was watching that game and I was like, wow, if I saw this defensively all year, then this would be a much better team. And I think they'd be in a better place than they are in now.
I mean, do you think that was based on the fact that everybody on that floor was playing for something as an individual? So you had guys playing for playoff rotation minutes and other guys were just playing to find a team that's willing to let them latch onto them next season. I think that there were so many guys on that floor with an individual agenda that it actually was in their best interests to play as a group and play with heart and show some real hustle. That because Tremont Waters is a prime example. He played exceptionally well, but he's an unrestricted free agent in 2-3 weeks, depending on how long the Celtics are in the playoffs. Not trying to be a pessimist, just a realist. Yeah. But after that, I don't think he's going to want to be on a two-way contract again for a third year. And I don't think Boston are going to renew him as a full-time contract, a guaranteed contract, because they have Carson Edwards. So unless they move Carson Edwards out to bring Tremont in, Tremont's going to be looking for a new team. So playing well in that game against the Knicks when they've got their 4th or 5th seed starters out there that are going into home court advantage in the playoffs against a former MVP in Derrick Rose, that performance has done wonders for him as an individual. So I think that there was a very big reason for those guys playing the way they did. I'm happy they played that way, but the motivation was certainly there.
Yeah, and I mean, the Knicks, they were playing a Knicks team that was trying to secure that 4 seed and get home court advantage for that first round playoff series. So we knew that the Knicks were going to come in with that type of energy and desperation too, that they were really trying to win that game. And they were playing their starters too. And so the Celtics knew that going in, and you saw a lot of these young players that came in and were like, this is my time to really show that I deserve a spot on this team. And if I can make a statement today, then maybe this team will decide to take a chance on me down the road. So it was really fun to watch that. And that was the type of game that, you know, when the Knicks were going up by 20, I was like, yeah, I mean, this isn't really a surprise just with the circumstances and that we have in this game and the players that are playing. But then they started to come back. And I said, yeah, these players really are trying to make a statement here that, you know, I can compete and I can play on this team. And it was really cool to see them all working together to do that. And that's a really, really cool thing to see. And that was one of the more fun games for me to watch this year as a fan, because that was just one of those games that I was just super excited to see now what the Celtics will do with that when their season is over and it comes to that time to, you know, when it's free agency or when they have the chance to re-sign players, who are they going to bring back? Who are they not going to bring back? And I think it's going to be fun now to see, based on what those players did on Sunday in that game, to see which of those players they decide to bring back here.
Yeah, and I mean, some of those guys boosted their trade value. I think Grant Williams showed that he's a viable option if he gets more minutes, and if a team can kind of figure out what role he's going to be in, and just say to him like, Grant, you're going to be a small ball five. Grant, you're going to be a four. Instead of being like, today we need you at the three, but tomorrow we need you at the five, and then the day after we need you. It's too much for a young guy to have such a diversified role when he's realistically a 3 and D guy, but he's very much so only against big, slow, strong centers. So I think having games like that where you can boost trade value is beneficial to the player because he could go to a more favorable location, a more favorable situation. But it's beneficial to the team when you know that changes need to be made on that part of the rotation anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And Grant is somebody that I know a lot of fans have been frustrated with all season because I mean, I saw a lot of people on Twitter, and I don't necessarily disagree with this, that they just didn't feel like he really has a place here or that he really was being super productive on the floor with this team. And I see him being somebody that they could trade and get a decent return on now that he kind of had the performance that he did, and he's starting to show glimpses of, yeah, I can go somewhere else and maybe be in the best situation for me. And what they could get in return, obviously for him, isn't going to be anything drastic, but it could be a decent return for him because of the way that he played. And so I think that's something to keep in mind too, and consider. I do hope that they re-sign Evan Fournier. I think that should be a priority for them, and I hope that they do that. But I think there's a lot of things they can do in this offseason that they can maybe look into for on the trade market and try to get some return to help set them up, because this is a team that we've seen get so close and just can't finish the job. And there's still work that needs to be done there for them to be able to compete with some of these other teams, like, I mean, the Nets, 76ers, the Western Conference in general. I mean, that's just a strong conference in general. The Jazz, the Suns, you still have the Lakers now that they're fully healthy. So, and even Milwaukee, teams like that you have to compete with. The Celtics still have work they need to do in the offseason, and I think there's a lot that they can do this offseason to be able to put them in better contention with some of those teams.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a lot of Brad Stevens' press conferences over the last, I'd say 6 to 12 weeks, he's made a very big theme of emphasizing how small this roster is in terms of height and wingspan. And he hasn't used it as an excuse, but it does definitely feel like he's sending a message to Danny Ainge saying, like, look, we're having to play small because we don't have the height, we don't have the athleticism that some of these other teams have. And maybe that's what they need now. They need to add some more size on that bench so that when guys like Tatum are sitting down, you're not losing half a foot of wingspan on defense. You're not losing a few inches off somebody like Tristan Thompson when you're going to Grant Williams, and now your rim pressure, your defensive rim pressure is decreased because you don't have that shot contention there anymore. So I think that's definitely something they need to look at. Adding some more veteran ball handlers, somebody that's a secondary creator, someone that's going to work off ball and operate as a playmaker and a shot creator for others rather than for themselves. I think that's going to be huge. I know somebody suggested Ricky Rubio. I don't think the money's ever going to work, but I think that's the type of player that you need to be looking for, whether that as a point forward or that as a point guard or whatever position is fine with me. For me, I think Kelly Olynyk would be a great fit to come back into this team, add that playmaking, that creation. But the changes have to be made. It's certain at this point. There's too many teams that are so deep. Philadelphia, they were short on their rotation last year, and it cost them in the playoffs. They went out in the summer. They added an excellent draft pick in Tyrese Maxey. They brought in Seth Curry. They developed Thibault a bit more. And I'm sure they brought in somebody else that I can't think of right now. But they basically just added to their roster. They retooled and got deeper. And now they're one of the best teams in the league. So it's definitely it's viable. We've seen other teams just make those small changes that can take you from a second round exit trajectory to a potential finalist trajectory. So it's available to the team. They just need to be very smart in the moves that they do decide to make.
Yeah, and we've seen them be competitive, and on paper they are talented, but we've said this for a while that it's a young team and with a lot of young players on it, and I think that was a huge factor in the playoffs last year, and it was very, very disappointing seeing them come up short against Miami in the playoffs last year because they were playing pretty good basketball all the way up until then. And I think I really was hoping that they would get over that hump and go to the finals last year. But there was a lot of young talent on the team, and they still are a relatively young team. So I think, like you said, having more veteran players on the team, just adding a couple people, is going to be very, very beneficial if they want to be a serious championship contender.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest issue with the entire blame Brad, blame Jason, blame Jalen, this whole narrative that's just taken over all of Celtics social media. It doesn't matter what platform you use, it's the same stuff. Oh, and it's so draining. And my biggest thing with everything there is you need to look at what this team have done in terms of they've rebuilt rapidly. They've made multiple conference finals against all odds multiple times, and now they're kind of having a down year because the pieces aren't there. And when you look at what they've achieved as a unit and what they're going to achieve in a year or two once some more changes are made, things look a bit brighter. You don't need to look at everything through a what have you done for me right now lens. But I do think this team has straddled two timelines consistently for a while now, and that's immediate contention and rebuilding for future domination too. And I think we've come to a point now where you have no options left. You have to choose a lane and stick to that lane. You've got no more draft capital left. Your cap space is precarious at best. So now what you need to do is say, right, we're either going to run it with these young guys, we're going to have a couple of tough years, and then we're going to be amazing, or some of these guys have got to go. We need to bring in veterans, and we're going to contend right now because we need to convince Jalen and Jason that you can win rings in Boston.
Yeah, and that's what's been very frustrating to me. And I've had this conversation with other people before too, is that it's just there was no clear path that they were taking. And I was hoping that we would know that by now, but it's, they start to rebuild while also trying to be serious contenders. And you really cannot do both right now. And if you stay stuck in the middle like that, you can't fully commit to either. So then you're not really going to be able to get anywhere at the end of the day anyway. I mean, look at Brooklyn and how much they gave up to get James Harden and have that big three in Brooklyn, that they're obviously very clearly in the win now bucket because they gave up a lot of their young talent and a lot of their depth that they had around them for the future to win now. And so we knew that was their goal. And if they don't win now, as in the next couple of years, then they're kind of stuck. They're going to have to basically start over and do another full rebuild. And so the Celtics are at the point where it's like, okay, if you want to try to win now, that's fine. But that means you're going to have to be willing to get rid of some of the players that you have, get some solid veterans that can really bring you all the way to the finals and get that championship. And if you don't think you want to do that because you don't want to give up yet on the young talent, then you have to start building around them and just be willing to sacrifice a couple years and be like, yeah, we might miss the playoffs the next couple years while we're working on this rebuild, but then we have the potential to be a really, really good team for years to come. And it's just frustrating to me that they still haven't committed to either of those. And I think that's been the biggest issue.
The other thing for me is like Jalen and Jason are now, I know they're like Jalen's contract extension kicked in this season. Jason's hasn't even kicked in yet. It kicks in next season. But the time is on. The clock is now counting down to when their next big free agency comes up. So for me, it's much easier to sell both of them on a rebuild when they own a championship ring and they have multiple finals appearances in the bank. Maybe then you can sell them on a rebuild. Hey, we've done this for you. We're now rebuilding to do it for you again, rather than we're going to rebuild now. And when you're coming up for a contract renewal, maybe then around that time, we'll be able to start contending. Much easier to sell people that have achieved a rebuild than you don't want to make them just remember that Boston could never put a competitive roster around them. Makes the franchise look inept, makes it very hard to draw free agents if they did decide to leave. So to me, I think you should go all in on winning with these two guys now and then sell them on a rebuild after the fact.
I agree with that, because that's a really special combo of players that we have here in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. And as soon as Jaylen Brown, it was announced that he was going to miss the rest of the season, that immediately lowered all expectations I had for the playoffs, which weren't super high as it is, just based on the way that they were playing. But that just made it even lower. But it just shows how important to this team those two players are right now. And if we can't show them that we care about them being here, then they're not going to want to stay here down the road. And if they want to win a championship here, then the Celtics need to do something to help them get there now, instead of trying to just be halfway between winning a championship and doing a rebuild, because they're not going to want to stay here down the road if we're still stuck in this same situation. So I'm with you on that. And I think we need to focus on building around those two and keeping them here. And that means making a decision either way with the direction of the franchise, because that's been a big problem that is still not super clear. And I think that they've been attempting to do both, but you can't do both at the same time, because then neither one's going to be super effective. And I know there's also a lot of people that are saying they want to fire Brad Stevens and they don't want to see him here anymore. And a lot of people are pinning all of the Celtics problems this season on him, but I don't agree with that either. I don't think that this is fully a Brad Stevens issue, and I don't think that getting rid of Brad Stevens this offseason is going to just fix everything.
I mean, the first thing these people need to realize is Brad Stevens signed a contract extension going into the bubble last year. He has 6 years left on that deal. It's going to cost the front office north of $20 million to remove him from that position. Yeah. They're not going to pay that. No chance on earth. I also think that I'd like these people to name me a coach that could come in and do the job that he's doing and do it as well, if not better than he is. There's a reason he's viewed as one of the best young coaches in the league. And I know people are like, hey, he's not young no more. He's been in the NBA 7 years now. In coaching terms, he's young. Like, he's got 10, 20 more years left in the NBA. He's young. He's not Popovich. He's not retiring in the next year or two. I think that my biggest gripe has been the assistant coaches and the lack of NBA level experience of the assistant coaches. I've been very vocal over the last 12 to 18 months how much of a loss Kara Lawson was. If you go further back than that, Brad, I can never remember the guy's name, but Brad Stevens' first assistant got a head coaching job at college, left the Celtics to go there, and Kara Lawson was who came in to replace him. When Kara Lawson left, so did the cohesion on both the defensive and offensive sides. Because what Kara Lawson did was she was a respected voice in that locker room. She was an athlete that had won on multiple high levels, won championships, won Olympic gold medals. She was you had to respect the words that came out of her mouth. But she also acted as a pivot point between coach and player, because she wasn't far removed from being a player herself, but she was also a coach. And I think that that's what they wanted to replicate with Evan Turner coming in. But Evan Turner's not a coach. He's basically in an ambassadorial role. And I think that the assistant coaching staff could do with upgrades rather than the head coaching position. That's been my stance this year.
Yeah, I like that analysis. I think that having somebody like that can relate to the players from an athlete standpoint, but also be able to connect with the coaching staff, and having that bridge person, like you were saying, is very, very important. And the Celtics lack that right now. And that's an issue. And I think that Brad Stevens, in the whole grand scheme of things, and with everything that this team has been through in his tenure with the team, and just thinking about the progress that they've made, and just thinking about every season that he's coached this team, I don't know if there's anybody that you could take in place with this roster right now and be able to do much better than that. And I know that people are very against Brad Stevens being here, but if they can't name somebody that could be better, then what do they suggest solves that problem? And I know that some people are arguing that, well, change can be a good thing, but I don't think change can be a good thing in this case. I think that he's doing the best that he can with the resources that he has.
Yep. At the end of the day, he's got an imbalanced roster that's top heavy, where the majority of the top guys have missed considerable amounts of time due to injury, due to COVID. Come back from COVID, you have to get your legs under you. Tatum spoke. I don't know if you listened to the Woj pod recently with Tatum on there,
Mhm.
but Tatum was saying he doesn't breathe the same anymore. He doesn't feel the same anymore. It's a completely different physiology for him, and he's having to try and work through that and hope that he starts to feel himself again eventually. So how do you coach that? How do you coach a physiological problem that's came from a deadly disease? And this has been one of my other issues where people are saying, oh, the team are lazy, they don't care, they're not trying. They're playing for your entertainment in the middle of a global pandemic where there's a deadly virus going around, and they're still going out and playing basketball. So you have something to watch while you're at home, self isolating. How is I want to know how that is selfish. I want to know how that isn't caring about. So I have a lot of retorts for these narratives, but I generally try not to get into the Twitter discourse because it can get quite nasty.
Yeah, I know. I mean, they're going out there, they're traveling. It's not like they're in a bubble anymore, you know what I mean? Where they just don't have to do any traveling. They're going out there, they're traveling to all these different locations to play these games still like they're used to doing, and they're going through the motions of a regular NBA season when the pandemic was still going on, and people and if they weren't willing to do that, then we wouldn't get basketball to watch. And so the players are doing a very good thing. And then being away from their families temporarily when they go to games and everything like that. It's a lot to ask of somebody to do that in the situation that we're in. So that's something that we all need to remember about all this too. And I think some people tend to forget that aspect of it, that they're kind of putting their lives out there to play basketball so that we can watch it while we're at home. And I think that that's a really cool thing. And I don't forget that, but I know that there are people that do. But when it comes to just overall the team, I think that there's just a lot of work that needs to be done. And like you said, it's either go one direction or the other, and just seriously commit to it and not half commit one way or the other, because that's not going to get us anywhere. And we're still going to be stuck in the same state of not being at the top, but not being at the bottom, and just being a team that's competitive enough to be a playoff team, but not be able to compete with other teams that are more filled out roster wise and it can actually be competitive. And so I think going into the play-in tournament, just kind of in general, what are you hoping to see from them against the Wizards? And just if they do lose that game and have to play another play-in game after this, what are you hoping to just see from them to hopefully win some of these games?
Offensively, I want to see them move off ball a lot more. I want to see some cohesion. Defensively, I just want to see pressure. Defense is 40% physical skills, 20% defensive schemes, and then 40% effort and execution. So you don't have to be the longest, tallest, strongest guy to be a good defender. That's only 40%, in my opinion. That's how I break it down. That's only 40% of what it takes to be a good defender. You can be an above average defender by executing, hustling your behind off, and just being locked in on your assignments and not letting somebody beat you. Play with pride, like if I'm playing like pick a ball and someone gets me on a backcut, I'm furious with myself, and you're not getting that backcut again because I'm not allowing it to happen. So that's the type of mentality I want them to come in with. Like, this is an important game. If you want to face Brooklyn, like, there's more, like, in my opinion, there's no shame in losing in 4 or 5 against Brooklyn in the first round. If you lose to Philly in 6 or 7, I don't care what it is, the shame in that, because the fan base are going to have to hear about it for the next 12 months. And I don't want to do it. So I expect you to so I expect you to come out and execute at the highest level possible. You're all rested. Everybody that was every integral cog in this team that are available rested against New York. You've had practice days. There is no excuse not to win this game, or not to at least run Washington close. Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook, that's your excuse not to win. But it shouldn't be a blowout by any means. So I'm just asking for some effort and some execution on both ends. And then if Brooklyn make it painless, then great. Everybody wants to go out painlessly anyway. And I'd much rather deal with Brooklyn fans for a year than Philadelphia fans for a year.
I would too. I mean, Brooklyn, yeah, I mean, dealing with Philadelphia fans is not fun. And the thing about that is just we know that the Celtics have the 76ers number in the playoffs in recent years too. So just imagining the idea of them beating the Celtics in the playoffs this year, I just don't want to hear about that after the fact. And I mean, the Philly's a really good team this year. We talked about it before, and they're a team that really has a chance to go deep in the playoffs this year, which is something that we haven't been able to really say about them in recent years either, because they made a lot of moves in the offseason. And so that would not be a team that would be, I don't think I'd be ashamed in losing to them either. However, I think the fan base would be easier to deal with if it was Brooklyn. And I think that the thing about the Nets is that without James Harden, they're not as much of like a clear favorite, but even without James Harden, they still can win games and they still can go deep. And I think they can even still go to the finals without him. That's just me, but I think that they're just very, very talented. And I think if I'd rather see them in the first round too. So, and the Wizards have been playing very, very good basketball lately down the stretch. This is not going to be an easy game by any means. And I mean, once they started putting everything together after the acquisition of Russell Westbrook and they started really clicking these last couple months, I'm watching some Wizards games. I was like, this team is not going to be a team, if they can figure everything out, that's going to be easy to see in the postseason. This is going to be a team that is going to play tough and that is going to be hard to beat. And so I think it's going to be a competitive game. I'm just really, really hoping that it's not one of those games where the Celtics start off very poorly, because we've seen that recently too, that they just don't start games well, and they'll go into the first quarter and they'll start missing shots, and then they'll go down by a lot of points, and then it's just hard to recover from that later on. And I'm just hoping they can avoid that in this game and be able to start the game earlier, and start the game better rather, because that's been a big issue for them lately.
Yeah, the biggest thing for Boston really is going to be, as you say, starting off strong, but executing in transition defense. If you watch the Wizards play, they play at such a pace. They're getting rebounds, and this is the one thing that Russell Westbrook is, in my opinion, the best in the league at, is getting a rebound and turning it into instant offense in a second. He's like a blur once he's at full speed, and the Celtics have struggled at that transition defense area all year. So being able to, if you need to either make all of your shots so there's no rebounds to get that transition opportunity, or you need to build out from the ball you need to build out to the ball exceptionally quick. Otherwise, Russell Westbrook's going to go for a triple dribble on you very, very easily. And having an outlet like Brad Beal that is a nightmare to guard himself is another big issue. Now, my biggest concern is Tatum and Beal getting caught up in a your turn, my turn type of offensive battle. And we've seen them do that before, and it never works out well for Tatum, because Tatum doesn't play well when he's forcing it. So I'm very concerned about how Tatum handles being in not a win or go home, but it's very close to a win or go home situation against a guy that he grew up trying to imitate, and somebody he's very close with. We could see Tatum get sucked into some hero ball here.
Yeah, they do have a lot of respect for each other, and yeah, they grew up together, and Bradley Beal spoke very, very highly of him over the last few days, and I think that that's really cool. But that's something that I think is a little concerning to me too, and just defense in general is just a big one, because we pushed that all season, and that's going to be really, really important tonight. And they're going to need to make sure that they're playing aggressive basketball and they're treating this game like it's a serious game, because it is. Because I feel like almost in some games this year, they've gone into games thinking that they kind of could easily win the game, and then they go and lose against teams that they should beat. Like, I mean, recently, a few weeks ago, they lost pretty significantly against the Hornets in a game that they should have won. and it just, there was a lack of effort there. And I think that in some games that they've approached this season, the effort just hasn't been there. And I hope that they realize that this is a very important game, because it would be nice to win tonight and then be able to just prepare for the playoffs and not have to worry about playing that second game later on this week. So I'm just hoping they come into the game strong, and from start to finish, there's that effort and there's that aggressiveness and there's that coordination, and that, seems to be asking for a lot, but that everybody's, communicating with each other and working off of each other, which is just something that they've had a problem with too.
What's the over-under that Marcus Smart gets ejected?
Oh gosh. I would probably put that number pretty high based on events as of late. That whole situation from recently, a couple weeks ago with that game, that was just crazy to me. I could go off about that whole situation and how angry I was with the refs in that game, but I would probably give that a pretty high chance that he does get ejected at some point in those, and maybe even in the first half.
Yeah, I've got it as if anything's going to go wrong, it's Marcus Smart getting ejected. If anything's going to go wrong, that's the most probable cause.
It is. Yeah. I'm not, I'd be more surprised, I'd say, at this point, if he doesn't than if he does.
So you're taking the over or the under?
I'm definitely think I have to take the over.
Me too. If it's going to go wrong, that's where it's going to be.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's a reasonable question. This game is going to be is huge, and I just really was down the stretch when there were games that I really was hoping they could win to avoid the play-in tournament, and they didn't. Just more and more as reality was sinking in that they were going to be playing in the play-in tournament, the more excited I got for, okay, like this should be pretty fun. I wasn't completely sold on the idea of the play-in tournament originally when the idea first was brought up when they originally executed it. But the more and more that I thought about it, the more I said, wow, this actually kind of makes things more exciting and more intense for teams. And now, the Lakers are in it, so that's gonna be good for the NBA, having the Lakers in a play-in game. And granted,
Lakers and Warriors.
They weren't. Granted, the Lakers weren't fully healthy all year either, but the Lakers and Warriors in a play-in game is going to be fantastic. I'm excited to see that. That would have been a great matchup to have actually in the playoffs right now, but I'm excited to see that one. But I think the more and more that I realized the Celtics were in the play-in tournament, the more sold on the idea I got.
I think for me, I want to watch Steph Curry beat LeBron in a play-in tournament, and I want to watch LeBron just lose his absolute mind over everything. In terms of Boston, like, there's pros and cons to winning now against Washington, to losing. And, that all comes down to who your first-round matchup is. We spoke about both of those teams. I think both of them are good enough to beat the Celtics without Jaylen Brown. So, the other option is you lose both and you try and get a lottery pick. But you don't want no more young guys, because we've just spoke about choosing the right. So the only reason you do that is if you're trying to package that pick with some dead wood, like a Carson Edwards or a Grant Williams, to try and bring in a vet from another team that's looking to start a rebuild. So there's value there too. And that value is higher if you lose both of these playing games, because it's a lottery pick, compared to if you get the 21st to 25th pick. At the end of a first round isn't as enticing as a lottery pick. So I can see value in winning. I can see value in losing. So I'm going to be happy no matter what happens. I'm refusing to let it upset me at this point. But it's going to make my coverage a lot harder if they decide they want to lose these games.
Yeah, I agree with you there, because I was trying to weigh out the options in my head, and I said either way, they're not going to be in a bad place. Even if they do lose both games, there's not a way to really be in a bad place, and they set it up that way this year. So there's not it's not like you're going to lose the games and then just be in this dark hole that you can't recover from. There's always going to be that other option of getting that lottery pick. And it would be interesting if they do end up in that situation, how they utilize that and what they end up doing, because that's going to be a big question mark, as we've seen, since like there's always been question marks in terms of the direction they're trying to go in. So I obviously would be upset if they lose and if they win, but it's not the end of the world if they do lose this time around, which is a good time for it to happen because they are in the middle of trying to figure things out right now. So this would be a good time for that to happen if they were to lose those games, so that they can really make that commitment of we're going either direction. And I think if they had Jaylen Brown, I'd be much more confident going into this game tonight, because I think with Jaylen Brown, I'd give the Celtics a pretty good chance of beating the Wizards tonight. But not having him is obviously going to be a challenge, and I think it's going to be a much tougher game to win now based on how the Wizards have been playing and just not having him out there.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think there's a way that they can make it any easier at this point. Like they're at Jaylen Brown is their secondary scorer behind Jason Tatum. He's also their second best on-ball defender behind Marcus Smart. He's a huge loss. There's no way you can look at it and think that it's an easy one to paper over, because it's not. And for me, the way I'm looking at it now is they need, and I spoke about this, I remember writing a piece about this at the very beginning of the year and saying that you need to implement a hierarchy. You need to implement your first, second, and third option. And you need to start like a pecking order of who is your primary guy on offense, who is your guy that's guarding the best player every possession on defense. And I think that the only way you can feasibly get at least into the playoffs now is to define that hierarchy and stick to it rigidly, and then reassess what happens when you go up against Brooklyn or Philadelphia. I'm not advocating that they tank these two games. I'm just saying that if they do, there's upside there. I can find silver linings with that. If they don't, then great. We get to talk about basketball for another 2 weeks minimum.
Yeah, exactly. So there's not really a real downside either way, depending on how you look at it. And so I think that that's kind of what's making me feel a little bit better about all this. It still was crushing finding out that Jaylen Brown wasn't going to be able to play. I mean, that immediate feeling was still something that I wouldn't recommend to anybody. But it's just knowing that kind of, if their playoff chances were already not super high of going far, that just kind of put a damper in everything even more. But I think you're exactly right when you say that we can find positives in the situation, even if they don't come out of these games. And I would like to believe that they will win at least one of these two games. And even if they don't win tonight, that they will win their next play-in game. I mean, I like to be positive about it, but it's just, it's going to be very, very challenging to win games without Jaylen Brown, who's just such a key part of this team right now. And I just hope that everybody really steps it up tonight. And I'm excited for this game. I think it's going to be really fun, and it's a lot of pressure and it's high stakes, and we love playoff level basketball. But it's just, there's just definitely a lot that they're going to have to do to win, and they're going to have to just play their best basketball. And we have not seen their best basketball every game. So I hope that they come out there and they can just keep it competitive, and they can start off strong so that they don't get down early. Because if they get in a hole early, they leave themselves in a hole coming into the second half where they have to try and come back from these 20-point deficits. And then sometimes they get close and then they can't finish. So I hope that they don't end up in that situation, and that they can just start off strong and keep it a competitive game the whole time, and just be aggressive and figure out how to shut down Westbrook. And I think that if they do all that, I'm optimistic that they can win this game. But I think it's going to be fun, and I'm excited to see it. But there's just a lot on this. There's just a lot on these couple games coming up.
Yeah, I've kind of got myself to the point where I'm just like, I'll react after the fact. I'm unfortunate and fortunate in the sense that I don't when it's a game this late, 9 p.m. Eastern start, I don't watch it live anyway.
Yeah.
That's like a 2, 3 a.m. tip off for me. So
I was gonna say you probably can't watch it live. Tonight's game is late, so
yeah, I mean, I can stream it. I can put it on League Pass or whatever I choose to. But I'm not doing it. Like,
yeah.
if it's a conference finals or a finals, then yeah, of course I'm staying up. I'm going to bed early, and I'm waking up for the game. But generally, I'll just do my normal routine, turn all my notifications off, and then watch the game fresh when I wake up. So I'll just get to react to it when everyone else is asleep in a lot less toxic environment. So I actually feel like for once that this is actually my benefit rather than to my detriment. So I'm quite happy about that this time.
Yeah, that's nice because you can watch it without seeing anybody else's reactions to the game, so you don't know what happened. And then when you're reacting, all of us in our time zone are sleeping and have already seen the game, so you have no idea what it happened. So it almost is like you're watching it live because it's not like you know what the final score was and then are watching it, because then that ruins the effect of the game if you already know what the final score is too, because then you kind of have an idea of how the game went. So if you just don't look at anything and then you just watch it when you get up without checking anything beforehand, that almost is like you're watching it live because everybody that watched it already is sleeping.
So what I'll do is I turn the scores off on my League Pass before bed. I wake up and I keep a notebook where I see if I've got any note. I keep a notebook where I just note down all, like, you can't see it, just players from games and stuff that I like. So I'll do that, and then what I'll do from there is, as soon as the game's over, I'll record my podcast for tomorrow. So people will hear my unfiltered, well, except for swearing. I'll swear before I go on air. But they'll hear my unfiltered thoughts as soon as they wake up. So then by the time everybody's ready to discuss the game, they've heard the podcast, and I'm on Twitter already waiting to start the interactions, we'll call it, the arguments, however you want to look at it. So no, I'm quite, I feel like this time round it's actually in my favor rather than me like, oh man, I just want to watch this game. I'm like, now I'm so happy I don't have to watch this live.
Yeah. Well, I hope that it ends up being a good result so that when you do wake up and you watch it, you can be pleased with how it turned out. And the rest of us can sleep well knowing that it was a good result. So I'm hoping for that for you and for all of us.
Yeah, it starts the day off wrong when it's a real bad loss. I'm watching it at like 7, 8 a.m. So if they lose, then I'm just like, that's just a bad start to the day. Like I'm sad before breakfast at that point. Like I'm not even like, you know what I mean? So like, I definitely want them to do well, but I've got to the point now where I can see silver linings everywhere. So I'm just like, whatever happens, happens.
Which is a great way to think about it. And I think hopefully more people start to see it that way as we progress. And I think that just no matter how this season ends, whether it's after that second playing game or whether it's they go into the playoffs and lose, I think that there's optimism there, and we can go into the off season with that optimism. And that's a good feeling to have. And that's something that's kind of keeping me open to any possibility that happens here. So I'm not going to be, I'm obviously I'm going to be upset if they don't win, but I'm going to be not as upset as I might typically be, just knowing the circumstances and everything surrounding the off season, and just the fact that there's so much optimism and reasons to be positive there.
That's the best way to be. At the end of the day, you don't want to let it affect your moods, and you know that this year's just been an absolute crapshoot, to put it nicely, for everybody, not just for the Celtics. So you know, it's not going to be an asterisk. I won't say that the team that wins is the quote unquote champions. They deserve it more because of how tough this year's been. But at the same time, it's not going to be something that I do an elaborate judgment on this roster and where they're heading once everything returns back to normal. So I'm kind of just approaching it holistically. And then at that point, you can just enjoy it for what it is. And that's just a spectacle. And then my rewatch, because I have to watch them twice because I'm an idiot, is usually a lot more. I try and put myself very centered so I can analyze exactly what's happening. So that one usually doesn't affect my mood either. So I recommend everyone watches it twice because you know, you can kind of talk yourself into good things that happened more on the second watch, and you can talk yourself back out of that bad mood at that point.
Yeah, and you can pick up on things that you might not have picked up on the first time around when you watch it again a second time too. There might have been things you missed the first time around or just didn't notice that you could pick up on the second time you're watching it.
Yeah, if you ask anybody that like covers the team, like for analyzing or like, you know, and we're actually told, like we're writing stuff that's going out to a big audience, we watch it twice because no, I'll start that again, because there's always going to be someone that noticed something you didn't, and then that one thing that they noticed could be what blows your entire piece to smithereens, and you're just like, man, I spent 3 hours writing this, and you come and destroy it in 10 seconds. So that second watch kind of keeps you feeling confident with what you're putting out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that feeling. I've had that happen to me before many times too. So it's very, very frustrating, but it's also, it makes me realize, yeah, I mean, this is something that I just missed. And it's important to just see things a second time and then just make sure you have a really, really good grasp on everything before putting out your work. So I definitely understand that frustration. But before I let you go, can you just let everybody know how they can find your show and tune in?
Of course. So you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Adam Taylor NBA. I try and make sure the content I put out on both are different as best as I can. You can find my podcast and my writing over at celticsblog.com. There's 2 podcasts on that website. So mine is Celtics Pod. You'll know it's mine because Mike Gorman intros us, which is dope.
That is cool.
So yeah, you can follow me there. You can read my work at celticsblog.com, and the Celtics Blog podcast is also where you'll find me rambling into the ether 3 times a week.
That's awesome. Everybody check him out. He has great work. He's really knowledgeable about the NBA and does a very, very good job of covering the Celtics. So definitely follow him on social media. Check out his podcast. Check out his articles. I definitely recommend it. And again, I appreciate you joining me on the show. I think it was a great conversation. And everybody, I always appreciate you listening every week. I know I say this every time, but I could not do the show without the constant support of everybody and the loyal listeners. You all know who you are. I just really appreciate the week-to-week support. So hope everybody has a great rest of their week, and go Celtics. And thank you again, everybody. Have a great night.